we would like,
if we may,
to take you on a strange journey. We are going time traveling this week, all the way back to the 1960s, before one of us was born, to focus on 5 of our favorite horror movies from that decade.
Welcome to the Fright Club podcast. I'm Hope Madden.
And I'm George Wolf, and we're from madwolf.com. And yeah, this is going to be fun. We thought we would go back and take a look at some of the movies from that decade, the 1960s, and find not only some great movies that stand alone, but movies that really influenced some of today's horror movies or influenced movies throughout the years.
And we're going to do this for the next few weeks, actually. Next week, we'll look at the 70s and the 80s and 90s and then the more modern horror films. But the reason we started with the 60s is that, the 30s obviously launched the monster movie. The 20s had some of the great, German films. But by the 50s, it was kind of schlocky, a lot of atomic monsters and stuff. For us, the 1960s really changed the direction of horror movies. And so that was why we wanted to start there. And there's a lot that we leave off, obviously. We're just talking about 5 movies across an entire decade. So, Mario Bava was incredibly influential in his films, especially my favorite is Black Sunday. Those are all 60s films. Hitchcock had a couple that we're not going to talk about. And then all of the great Vincent Price films like Mask of the Red Death. And then probably the worst that we're going to leave off, so we're going to apologize in advance, all of the Hammer, Christopher Lee, Dracula movies. Though I do love those, and I love Christopher Lee as Dracula, but we're not gonna touch on this because we really just we chose 5 standalone excellent films that we believe are the 5 best horror films of the decade.
Christopher Lee, quite an imposing Dracula.
Indeed.
Yeah, but an imposing figure no matter what he's doing. But yeah, so those we're not looking at for kind of obvious reasons. They a lot of times fall into their own genre.
Yeah.
You can say campy.
Yeah.
Hammy. All you really have to do for people to know is just say Hammer films.
Yeah.
And then you know what we're talking about. So, all right. So we might as well start off right at the very beginning of the decade, 1960, with one that's really maybe, I don't know if I want to say a lot of people are aware of. Maybe not, but
it is incredibly influential and really, really, really cool. It's called Eyes Without a Face. This one's a French movie from 1960 from French director Georges Franju.
And, of course, it features that great theme song from Billy Idol.
Actually, I think that might be the only disappointment is at no point does Billy Idol ride a motorcycle through stained glass. But other than that, it's really a great movie. No, it's it's not the first ever. So this film, I think, changed the trajectory of the mad scientist, mad doctor film. And you'll see, everything before that, usually they're making big monsters. And you'll see, obviously beginning with Frankenstein, but you'll see that after this movie, they start doing things that are a little bit more intimate, a little bit more creepy, less monster, more creepy, intimate. And so what happens here is a world-famous surgeon's daughter has disfigured herself in a car accident. And basically, he is removing faces from other young women of the same age and trying to graft them onto his daughter Christine's face. And, I think that there are a lot of things that make this movie work incredibly well. Mainly, it's the performances. And you'll see this same theme, like exactly this blueprint in 100 other movies, where it's a doctor who's brilliant and can't see that in furthering his own research, he's doing something completely immoral. And he's twisted into doing this because of a love of someone in his family who's damaged, but also just it's opportunistic. He wants to be able to have an excuse to further his research. And in almost every case, there's a rather handsome nurse helpmate who's just loyal and does whatever. And there's often a whole, as in this film, basement full of victims and future victims. But for some reason, in this particular film, it never seems lurid or tawdry. It's very, very creepy. And I think another big reason for that are the visuals. It's this beautiful black and white film. It's visually stunning. And then Edith Schaub is the name of the actress who plays Christiane. She's got this, blank white mask on her face. And she kind of looks to me a lot like Mia Farrow in Rosemary's Baby. Just waif-like, very thin with this little boyish haircut. Even though it's a very simple mask, it's a creepy mask. It is. So she just looks so haunted and haunting, and she just flits around the periphery of the whole film. And it has such an incredible effect on the whole movie. Because without her and this macabre but still really tender performance, it's just sort of awful, sort of horrifying, the movie. But then when she's there, it's just so bittersweet and sad. It's so cool to look at. But then again, it's not one of those just classy early horror films either. I mean, there's some really kind of gross surgery going on that they show. It's really ahead of its time.
And you talk about it being intimate. In a way, you can see how this was an intimate offshoot of going back to those, the type of monster movies that came out of the paranoia over nuclear bombs and experiments and science. That was on a global scale. Sure. It unleashes monsters like Godzilla. You can see how this was, in a way, that same type of theme, but making it more intimate just on people.
Yeah.
And also maybe the beginning of some of the body horror that we talked about last week with Cronenberg.
Oh, absolutely. No, absolutely. I mean, it's just another, it's just Frankenstein in a new direction, which is always, horror always has a theme of terror of science ever since Frankenstein, and this takes it in a really fascinating new direction.
Yeah, and there are also very tense moments because when the police come and maybe they start to get on the trail of the doctor, and because he's an esteemed doctor and he gives them a reason, oh no, it's this and that, and they just take it at his word and go away, and then they're not going to catch him.
No, exactly. And the actor's name is Pierre Brasseur, and he is magnificent. He's just haughty enough, he's just tender enough. He does such a great job of being, what I think one of the reasons that it's so effective, a little bit believable, like you buy it. He's there, and there's a really great early scene where he's been called in to identify a body because the police and the town believe that his daughter perished in this car accident. So he's been called in to identify a body of a similar-looking young woman, same age, who's naked in the river and doesn't have a face, so they can't identify her. And he goes in and he identifies the body as his daughter, which we know already is not the case. Then he comes out and he walks past another old man sitting on a bench weeping because he was kind of half-heartedly hoping this was his missing daughter, because now at least he would know where she was. And of course, we all know it was his missing daughter. And it's just a very effective scene, and it sets you up for who this character is the whole rest of the movie.
Yeah, and it's been very influential. Not only you could pick out Twilight Zone episodes, many TV shows, but just a few years ago there was a movie that I really loved called The Skin I Live In. It starred Antonio Banderas, and it was directed by Almodovar.
Yeah, Pedro Almodovar. It's the only close to horror movie he has ever made, and he's a great director no matter what, and this is really one worth seeking out.
Yeah, and it's really close to this, and if you haven't seen it, I don't really want to give away anything because there are some big twists in this movie, and it's really worth checking out, from 2011, called The Skin I Live In. And if you've seen both movies, you'll see how, boy, is so influenced by Eyes Without a Face. So check out both of those if you can. And we're going to move on just 1 year later, one that I know is one of your favorites from 1961. It's called The Innocents.
We lay, my love and I, beneath a weeping willow.
Boy, I do love this one. I love this movie. And it's an adaptation of the Henry James novel Turn of the Screw, which has been adapted a million times. This is easily the best version. It's such a foundational film. There are so many movies that are like this where the whole film depends on, is the lead female character crazy, or is something supernatural happening and no one believes her? And there are a million movies that take that premise. Some of them do a great job of it. The Others, for example, with Nicole Kidman, or The Orphanage, which we loved from a few years ago. They, but none of them do it as well as The Innocents. And it's Deborah Kerr is perfect as the high-strung governess, and is as she sort of moves into spinsterhood. Is she lost it? Or, are the two little kids that she's nannying, are they really in danger of being kidnapped by the spectral forces? Oh my God, it's such a great movie. And it's so good looking. It's just one that really treads on your imagination, that requires you to fill in the gaps, but it's never dull. It's never boring. It's so well written, obviously. It's Yeah, I just can't say enough about the Deborah Kerr performance.
Yeah, and I got to be honest, I don't like it as much as you do. I recognize it for its significance, but it's funny, if you go on and do any sort of research about it and start looking up, you really see how often people that you've heard of, or just random people, will name it as their favorite horror movie ever. I mean, it really strikes a chord with a lot of people. And needless to say, it's from 1961, so it's not blood and guts by any stretch of the imagination. It's more, in a window behind Deborah Kerr, there's a face and pops up, and then it's gone, and things like that. So it can be very creepy. And, of course, it's gothic, the scene, the architecture, that type of thing, like a governess, and the kids that she's in charge of. It's all, and there's something little, always ghost story, related about gothic scenes and gothic sets and those big houses and mansions and wide open fields and things like that. And so it plays on that. And as you said, the point of view that the audience has to decide as to whether she's crazy or is something going on here can be really effective. But
and I think it does a great job of tapping into the tales of the dead former governess and her lover and what is it about those stories that the Deborah Kerr character is so obsessed with those stories, and yet she's turning away from those stories because they're so impure. On the other hand, as she's hovering over, I don't know how old she would have been in the 1960s, but the idea that she may never be with the man, she may be a spinster the rest of her life, and so it's sort of this, primal. She wants to be fascinated by it, but then again, she doesn't want to, and so is she just making up the story that there are ghosts there? And I love too the rest of the staff. They're all very like, no, there's no ghosts here. But those dead people did terrible things, but no, there's no ghosts here. And I think the other thing that makes it work out so well are the little kids, the kids who play, her charges are, especially the boy, super creepy. Like adorable with their little chubby faces and yet super, super creepy.
And their voices.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And this one, we can point out a few films since 1961 that have taken on this same theme. That you mentioned The Others, that's from 2001 with Nicole Kidman. Mm-hmm. Really well done.
Yeah.
Really well done. And a nice twist at the end. If you go in blind, if you don't know what's going on, that's worth checking out. The Orphanage from 2007, and that was directed by, was it directed by Del Toro or produced?
No, it was produced by Del Toro.
Yeah. Also very effective. Another one that's not by any means bloody or gory or anything like that, but it's creepy.
It is really, really creepy, and it owes a lot to this movie.
Yeah.
Because again, one of the reasons that The Orphanage works as well as it does, and it's magnificent, is because of how invested you are in the lead character, and how the movie gives as much credit to the idea that there are ghosts there as it does to the idea that she's just crazy. But we want you to avoid the Innocence sequel.
Actually, a prequel.
Sorry, it was actually
prequel. Yeah, it
prequel,
was.
You're right.
10 years later, in 1971, it was supposed to be a prequel to Turn of the Screw or The Innocents, and it's called The Nightcomers from 1971.
So Marlon Brando stars, which might make you think, "Ooh, I should look at." You shouldn't. It's one of those where somebody takes a concept, and then so basically they decided. Was it ghosts or was she crazy?
Yeah.
And then they created a prequel. And First of all, it's just stupid. And second of all, you don't want them. You don't want the decision made for you.
Exactly. So avoid that one. But Orphanage and The Others are worth checking out, especially if you've already seen The Innocents. But if you haven't, please check that one out from 1961. Moving ahead now a few years, one that everybody's heard of if you haven't seen it, the classic Rosemary's Baby.
What have you done to it? What have you done to its eyes?
He has his father's eyes.
What are you talking about? Guy's eyes are normal. What have you done to him, you maniac?
Satan is his father, not Guy. Hail Adrian! Hail Adrian! Hail Satan! Hail Satan!
He has his father's eyes.
And that group full of people in there. Ruth Gordon and all the... And
she won an Oscar for that.
Yeah.
Ruth Gordon won an Oscar for that. How great is
They're
that?
just so creepy. It's one of the many creepy things and effective things about this movie. They've got their drinks, their glasses, and it's just a party, and they're just, they're just nuts. But you know what also I like about that scene is, if you notice, the husband, he stays in the background while she is going over to the baby and checking and, having a breakdown and saying what... He's back in the back. He won't face her. His back is turned while the older group that are behind this are all partying. He's he won't come out, which is kind of interesting because it makes you think throughout the whole movie, although he was obviously a very willing participant in this plan, what his thoughts are about it, because he's not out there partying with the rest of them.
No. Yeah, John Cassavetes' character is an interesting one. He's just he's just a lout. He's just a narcissist, would-be actor, and not a good husband to begin with. And so he's just, again, opportunistic. And it is interesting to watch the way he behaves when it's all over. But the movie, between Ruth Gordon and Mia Farrow, it's, one of the things I love about this movie is that Roman Polanski takes all of the glamour out of Satanism, which all through the 60s, there were a million sort of black mass movies, and they're all in robes, and they're all gorgeous, and there's all orgies, and then
they're
he
ridiculous.
has them. Yeah, they are. And he has them as these doddering old people, these just overly rouged, and I love that. I love that about this movie.
Yeah, and he wrote this, he directed, obviously, and he also wrote the screenplay, which was adapted from the novel. Now, I haven't read the novel, so you can always think that part of that was his shaping it, the vision that he wanted it to have, and it's very effective that way.
It is. It's part of a trilogy that he did along with Repulsion and The Tenant, of sort of, urban, apartment dweller nightmares, and Repulsion in particular I really, really like, but easily the best of the three is Rosemary's Baby.
Yeah, and we don't want to get off on a tangent about the personal troubles of Roman Polanski, but that's a whole nother conversation. But it reminds you, back then, even up until just his last movie that I saw, Venus in Fur, so good. He's so talented, and you kind of have to separate that sometimes because
from the fact that he's a horrible human being, a monstrous person. Yeah, so, you do.
Yeah, and this movie especially, because the way it sets up the slow creeping dread, where what's going on, and even the scenes where she's being quote unquote attacked, she's been drugged, and they just show the demon's eyes a little bit, and then she yells, "This is not a dream. This is really happening," and he makes it surreal enough where you don't want to show too much, because especially in 1968, you don't have CGI or anything like that. You can't. So he just showed enough and didn't show enough, which sometimes can be even more effective.
Yeah, and again, Mia Farrow, especially once she's hugely pregnant, she's just the vision of vulnerability.
Yes.
She's just, because she's so little and she's so skinny in this movie, and this enormous belly, and she can barely get around, and she's sick all the time. Oh my God! I mean, it's hard to imagine, a heroine who is more handicapped by her own body than she is in this movie. It's a great performance.
Yeah, and they of course always want her to just do nothing but go back to bed.
Yeah,
and they keep her drugged up, and that's very true. She's the epitome of someone who's helpless, which is how they want it. But then at the very end there in the clip, it's really amusing how she's expected to just play along almost, and while she's just screaming that they're all maniacs, and of course they are. But and they played on that casting when I think when she was cast as the nanny character in the remake of The Omen.
Right.
Remember that a few years ago?
Absolutely.
I mean, that was kind of an inspired bit of casting. Well, we're just going to flip the script here.
Yeah, exactly.
And to be honest, I don't think she was as effective in that role as Billy Whitelaw.
She was not.
In the original.
You are not
Billy
kidding.
Whitelaw was a freak.
Yeah.
In the original Omen. Which was great. But I thought it was a nice bit of casting.
I think, about back to Rosemary's Baby, I love all of the dark humor in it. And I don't think that Polanski his humor works as often as it should in the films. He's done a handful that have the humor in them, and it doesn't always
work. It can be very
work.
dark as well. Yeah,
but in this one, I think, and it's dark. Obviously, the humor's dark, but it's part of it is because so much of it is in the hands of the great Ruth Gordon. It's just magnificent. The funny bits are so uncomfortably funny.
So always worth a look, especially if you haven't ever seen it. I would assume that you have, but always worth another look. Rosemary's Baby from 1968. And hard to believe, in the exact same year. Boy, talk about a double dip.
Yeah,
in the year
you're
1968. You had great music that year, and you had great movies. One of our favorites, Night of the Living Dead.
An experience in shock, more shattering than your strangest nightmare. Night of the Living Dead.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Stop stop it.
Ooh, it's a good one and a groundbreaker. You know, I think there are going to be a lot of people who would say, you know what? Night of the Living Dead is better than Rosemary's Baby, but it started it all. And it is, actually. It is a great, great movie. And the Barbara, they're coming to get you, Barbara. Judith O'Dea. We met her, and she's awesome.
She was a pip. She was so great. We met her at the Horror Hound convention, what, 3?
Yeah, 4 years ago, yeah.
And she was great. Oh, she was so spunky.
She was adorable.
Just adorable, yeah. And you got a picture with her, and she was talking about, you know, you don't have a whole lot of time when you're in those lines, but she took advantage of it for a little conversation. And it was funny because the picture that you chose to have her autograph, it had one of the other zombies in it who she recognized, and when she went to autograph the picture, what'd she say? Oh, it's Bob.
Yeah, exactly. And then she wrote "Help Me Hope" on there, which was great.
Yeah, so
we loved her. But that's not why we put it on the list. We put it on the list because George Romero's zombie epic just started everything. There had been zombie movies before him, but most of those were of the like Haitian voodoo, you know, type. And he really created the genre as we know it today. They're dead, you know, they're back.
They're all messed up.
Avoid their mouths. You know, their bites make you become one of them. All of those things, none of those things existed before this movie. They all started with Night of the Living Dead. And then, of course, there was all of the political, racial, sexual tensions of the era.
Well, I was going to say that, too. Let's not shortchange it, because casting an African-American in the male lead, you know, opposite a white woman, that was big stuff.
It was huge.
That's groundbreaking.
Oh, it was huge.
Because there were, as you say, there was unrest in almost every avenue of society in 1968.
Right.
And that was big. So it was groundbreaking, not only in a horror film vein, but just in a societal vein, where you could see an African-American not only as a male lead, but as a potential hero.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. All of those people would have died long before they did, were it not for Dwayne Jones. And then, you know, I mean, the whole film plays out really beautifully, but it's really the montage over the closing credits where I think he gets the most political punch. It's brilliant and unnerving and just wonderfully done. And my favorite thing, I think, throughout there are some fairly weak performances, but what goes on down the basement, super awesome, crazy creepy, and then the whole news footage break-in, the way that they're listening. I mean, the stuff that the news guy says, you know, it's mayhem. I mean, it's hilarious, the stuff that the news people say in the break-ins, but also then the way he treats the news style montage at the end sort of brings it all home and makes it very, very creepy. But I mean, like one of your favorite, oh, they're dead, they're all messed up.
That line, and then, well, you can light them on fire, they go right up.
You know,
I love that.
In later movies, I think sometimes Romero's paranoia about sort of the organized machine. I mean, in a lot of movies, it's basically you're better off with the monsters than you are with the militia or with the military or with the government, and that was born here. And I think, for my money, he does a better job with it in this movie than he does in subsequent films. But you know, for my money, he does a better job with almost everything in this movie than he does in subsequent films. I just think it is a masterpiece. Yeah,
in very different ways all throughout the movie. There's social comment in all veins of it. So definitely not just a movie to be dismissed as a horror movie or to be dismissed as just something that was influential in horror movies. It was just a groundbreaking film in all sorts of ways, and a classic for very good reasons. Night of the Living Dead with our buddy Judith O'Dea from 1968. And we got to leave the best one for last, maybe the granddaddy from 1960. It's Psycho.
Is anyone at home? Oh, that must be my mother. It's not as if she were a maniac. She just goes a little mad sometimes.
You know, even before I saw this movie, I can remember my mom years ago talking about how scared out of her wits she was when she saw this movie. And if you think about it in those terms back in 1960, boy, you can see why. Especially at the very end, when she goes down and turns that chair around, I bet people were just falling out of their chairs.
It's hard, I think, to think of it sometimes with that perspective, because so many movies have mimicked it since then. But when it came out, it broke ground in every possible way. And historically, it's always been said that they tried to talk Hitchcock out of making this movie because it was a horror movie and because really big directors didn't do that. But this is, the fact that one of the greatest directors working the day decided he was going to take on clearly a horror movie was huge for the genre because it made it that's one of the reasons I suppose that Roman Polanski could go ahead and do it later. I mean, it made it okay. Not only that, of course, he made one of the greatest horror films of all time in doing that. And it broke ground in ways I think people sometimes forget. The main character, obviously, they kill her off in the first act. Mm-hmm. Nobody expected that to happen. Nobody thought she was going to die that soon into the film. But also, before this happens, Marion Crane, we've already shown that she has premarital sex. And she steals money. Yeah. And yet she's still the sympathetic character. The film doesn't judge this character for that. That, oh my God, was groundbreaking in 1960.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course, Janet Leigh, huge star at the time. No one's going to think that she's going to be cut out of the movie so fast.
Oh, no, that was a huge shock. And of course, the shower scene itself was groundbreaking at the time, and that's what people most remember, and for good reason. It's a great scene. But I think one of the reasons it had the impact that it did is because no one thought this character was going to die this soon. Mm-hmm. They thought she would redeem herself in some way. They probably thought she was going to make it through the whole movie, and here she did. But then you're lost. Then what? Well, our lead character is gone. Who's our lead character now? Well, the film suggests it's that awkward, sweet Norman Bates. And that's how they pull the rug out from under you again. And then later on, when you start to suspect, I think Norman's not right in the head. Once you start to suspect it, who are the other characters, right? Sam Loomis and the Vera Miles character, Lila Crane. You don't like them, right? That's intentional because Hitchcock wants you to identify with Norman Bates the rest of the movie, and you do. And God help you when the car is in the water and not going all the way down, and the sheriff is there, and you think he's going to get caught. You can't help but, oh God, I hope that the water covers the car. Poor Norman. Yep. It was, I think, obviously groundbreaking, completely unnerving to people. I think even if they didn't realize on a cognitive level, this is why. It's because the character that they were rooting for the entire movie is the killer.
And of course, it's got those great Hitchcock touches when Norman is in his office there, either checking in Janet Leigh or being questioned by Martin Balsam, and they've got the stuffed birds on the wall and how they're photographed, the shadows, and they look like they're just about to attack, with their wings spread and everything. Just little visuals like that, and the way he shoots inside the house, where you never get a chance to see. You think you see a woman because you see hair and but you don't really. And that's easy to say now, oh, look, but think about audiences back in 1960. They were, as you say, because they were brought along in the film by Hitchcock to be sympathetic to Norman Bates, and they're thinking about, well, that's his mother, and then they're at the end there, and you flip the chair around, and and the music. Let's not forget the music.
Oh, yeah.
Classic.
Oh, absolutely.
Maybe, I don't know, maybe second, or maybe right up there with Jaws. It's just all you have to hear are like 2-3 notes. Boom. Yeah. That's the music from Psycho, and you're scared.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just an all-time classic. 1960, right at the beginning of the decade, and just set the bar so high for the rest of, schizophrenia movies, any kind of crazed killer-type movies. You might want to avoid the other sequels that they eventually got around to making for Psycho.
There's a TV show that we've not seen, but I've heard is great, Bates Motel. And actually, one of my favorite sort of rip-offs from the same decade, from the 60s, is called Peeping Tom, where it's one of those where, the parent made him crazy kind of a situation. It's a great one. Peeping Tom is great, too. Yeah, so five good ones there from the 1960s. But you know what? We could have missed some, and we can count on you to point out what we might have missed, or maybe some of your favorites from the 1960s. Let us know. We're always up for this on Twitter. We're at Mad Wolf. That's MADDWOLF on Twitter, so keep the conversation going. And keep the feedback coming, too, on the Golden Spiral Media feedback line. That's 304-837-2278. Or just go to goldenspiralmedia.com and you can leave us an audio clip. And if we like it, maybe we'll play it next week.
Yeah, one of the fun things about talking about horror movies is because the horror fans love to talk about horror movies. So,
and just a heads up, actually, we're going to talk about the best movies of the 1970s next week, and we have a bit of an argument going on between us as to what's going to be number one. So if you have any advanced thoughts about your votes, let us know.
From the 1970s, that should be fun. So until then, I'm George Wolf.
I'm Hope Madden.
From madwolf.com, and this is the Fright Club podcast. Until next week,
stay frightful, my friends.